Good morning and welcome everybody into a good afternoon, I should say. Welcome everybody into Two-Man Game here on ClavesOnline.com. I'm Matthew Roccio. That's Bob Ramsey. We're here to talk some basketball here on ClavesOnline.com. Rammer, before we get into it, welcome into the show. Thank you for joining me today. And
of course,
tell the folks where you are today.
Dayton, Ohio.
There it is, Rammer, of course, on the road for the Billikens versus the Dayton Flyers, the Arch Baron Cup on Friday evening, and he's so kind to join us live from Ohio.
I've been staying. This is the oddity. I've been staying in the Dayton Marriott across the Miami River from Dayton Arena for 37 years.
Is that your longest relationship? Hotel. Is that your longest relationship in life?
It is.
That's amazing.
Funny.
That's honestly amazing.
I've seen the hotel go through like 4 major multi-million-dollar renovations.
Does a single employee know you by name?
No, they've all died.
Oh, damn. Well, on that dark note, we're going to table a conversation about SLU basketball in Dayton, Ohio for the Arch Baron Cup till a little bit later on in the show, because we have to talk today, right off the bat, about an incredible NBA trade deadline. Obviously, we talked about what was kind of a nominal start of it with Kyrie Irving getting traded to the Mavericks over the weekend. But then this morning, everything gets kicked into high gear. There was a little bit, another one of a, kind of a little bump in the road, if you will, before everything got started. That was yesterday when the Lakers made their move, shipping out Russell Westbrook, getting back D'Angelo Russell. And then what I and namesake for this website, Michael Claiborne, would argue is the actual big move of that trade is Mike Conley Jr. getting moved to the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are trying to find a consistent point guard to run their offense and maybe make a run at a play-in spot in the West. And speaking of the West, that continued the theme of where the big moves were coming. Then, of course, it was Kevin Durant. If you didn't see it, Kevin Durant and TJ Warren were shipped off to the Phoenix Suns for 4 first-round picks, 23, 25, 27, 29. And they also sent Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, and Jay Crowder. Jay Crowder was then flipped to the Milwaukee Bucks for 5 second-round picks. By the way, that was one of 2 times where a guy got traded for 5 second-round picks today, which is just an insane number to see anytime you're watching it. So just right off the bat, we get a bunch of big moves that kind of completely change the West, and a couple smaller ones that change the East. A couple other ones I want to dive into really quickly before we talk about how the landscape has changed. Because in the West, it's been a lot of big moves, so we saw the Mavericks make a big move, and we saw the Suns make a big move. First in the West by 4.5 games right now is the Denver Nuggets. They had an interesting day, in my opinion. They traded away Bones Highland to the Los Angeles Clippers, who, while I love his style and he's a flashy player, he's a great talker, he had been kind of seeing his minutes decline over the last month or so it makes sense for them. They also made a trade for a backup center from the Lakers, Thomas Bryant. That was really the one thing the Nuggets needed, was a backup center. They get killed when Nikola Jokic isn't out there.
Yeah.
And then the kind of the last thing here, Rammer, that I want to bring you in, OG Anunoby doesn't get traded at all from the Toronto Raptors. Masai Ujiri comes out and says that they never saw the deal they really wanted for him. And that was obviously after the Kevin Durant trade. That was the big name a lot of people were throwing out because of his ability to defend a guy like Kevin Durant, or at least slow him down. So right off the bat, before we dive into some of the tertiary ones that have kind of hit since the big ones, your thought on the big changes in the Western Conference with Kevin Durant?
Well, there's a couple of things. The overarching stuff, because you're the detail guy when it comes to the NBA, but the overarching stuff to me is the East stands pat or tanks. The West gets in an arms race. I don't know if you're a fan, George C. Scott telling the president in the Kubrick film, he says he's afraid they're going to get into a mine shaft gap with the Russians. And it was an absolute arms race in the West. And teams, to me, it looked like we're afraid to fall behind everybody else. We got a deal. But to me, and the West stuff is really interesting to try and see how it's all going to lay out. but I'm fascinated at the saga, the exciting up and the horrific crash of the game plan of the Brooklyn Nets. When it was supposed to be Irving, Harden, and Durant becoming a super team, dominating, and a very short time later, they're all gone. They're all gone. But I do want to remind those three only played 16 games together, but they were 13-3 in those 16 games.
I've heard the 16 game stat. I haven't heard the 13-3 one yet.
They were 13-3, so they were on to something. But it's odd. It's just crazy to me how they were so close, and yet it all fell apart. Now I think you go and you see Kyrie go to the Mavs, but because of what the other teams did, the Mavs may technically be better, but are they relatively better? Because didn't the teams ahead of them also get better? I think it's a fascinating look at the West.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as soon as the Suns made the trade, everything got turned on its head because the Nuggets are the top team. But now when you look at rosters, everyone's gonna want to roll with the Suns as the team to beat now in the West. When you have a top four right off the bat of Devin Booker, Chris Paul, Kevin Durant, and DeAndre Ayton, it's going to be hard to beat that. I will say that my initial reaction to that trade, again, it's a great trade for the Suns. There's no doubt about that. But they're a much thinner team now. They had cobbled together a really good second unit, with guys like Cam Johnson and kind of the different, third point guards or third guards they would have out there. Dario Saric, who they also moved. I liked the second unit they put together, but it clearly there was a chemistry issue. There was just something not clicking in Phoenix, and they needed a change of pace. And obviously, Kevin Durant's one hell of a change of pace. By the way, not to be forgotten, I mentioned the Jay Crowder part of that deal. That's a huge deal in the East. The Knicks made a deal for Josh Hart. A couple other teams in the East, little deals there. The Philadelphia 76ers traded away Matisse Thybulle.
Whoa. Go back. Don't leave Phoenix.
Okay.
Go back.
All right.
Your depth, you got a great monologue going there. I think it's a great point about the depth. And for the long haul of the regular season, I think that would be very impactful. They're getting ready to play for postseason.
Yeah, that's all they care about.
That's all they care about. And I suggest, could be wrong, I suggest that a shorter rotation, not worried about the depth as much, might not be a factor in postseason.
And listen, they've gotten really good minutes out of some players that people I've heard. I'm going to say them right now, but most of the people who listen to the podcast haven't heard of Ish Wainwright or Torrey Craig. They've gotten good minutes out of them, and they got rid of Dario Saric. They brought in Darius Baisley from the Thunder. I think that move is just kind of because Saric is a big amount of money, and Durant's going to play a lot of small ball 5 minutes. So I mean, again, they got T.J. Warren, who. One of the worst trades in Suns history is when they just handed him to the Pacers with a first-round pick to get cap relief. Well, he was averaging almost 20 points as a fourth-year forward. So getting him back, too, as a scorer off the bench is honestly one of the best parts about the deal that no one's going to want to talk about. But if you have Booker playing what he can do, you have a healthy Chris Paul, you have now Kevin Durant, and you have a more engaged DeAndre Ayton, then you are arguably the top team in the West.
Yeah.
And that brings me to kind of my other point in the West, which is the Nuggets didn't have the first-round picks to go after OG Anunoby in a reasonable way. And I'm sure Masai Ujiri, who comes from Denver, probably had a couple of conversations with them that wasn't going to work out. So they had to cobble together their best moves possible. Getting rid of a backup point guard, bringing in some size down low when that's been your problem area, that's pretty much the best that Denver's going to be able to do. The only thing they could have done is bring in somebody who can potentially stop Kevin Durant from going atomic on you in the Western Conference Finals.
Maybe.
Do they?
I don't know who that is. Who is
I mean,
that?
OG, by the numbers, OG is one of the best defenders on Kevin Durant in the NBA. He's an Eastern Conference team in Toronto playing the Nets, so he's one of the people who has seen Durant the most this season, but he's one of the best defenders on him. Again, that essentially looks like Kawhi winning the MVP against LeBron because he kept him from going 30, 10, and 10 in the finals, while LeBron went like 26, 7, and 5. Kawhi got an MVP because he didn't go atomic, and so that's kind of my point. And so the question now is going to become: Can the Nuggets outscore this new Suns team? Can Aaron Gordon be the kind of super athlete that we've always thought he was going to be, and he kind of showed himself to be offensively this year? Can he do that maybe for a little bit defensively? Or does getting a Thomas Bryant so that you have a consistent center who can run your defense effectively essentially put a stop in what has been huge gaps in the Nuggets being able to be an effective team whenever Jokic hits the bench? It's kind of, you're trying to win the game, you're trying to win the day on the margins because nothing you can do compares to getting Kevin freaking Durant.
So I think everybody kind of sees how things look on paper. So my challenge is to you is to give me a dark horse. Give me not Phoenix, not Denver, who has maybe more chemistry than marquee power. See what I'm saying?
The one move I really liked, and the two other teams in the West who made some moves, is the Clippers made a lot of moves.
Yeah.
And I don't dislike the Clippers moves. They get Eric Gordon from the Houston Rockets. They get Bones Highland again from the Nuggets. I like the moves they made, but the one move I think is most interesting is that they traded away the best three-point shooter in Clippers history, Luke Kennard, and they traded him away to the Memphis Grizzlies.
Yeah.
The Memphis Grizzlies getting a knockdown three-point shooter is huge because, again, I think that's a team that at times when they play well, it's a greater than the sum of their parts, and they got a lot of great parts. And here's the thing: freakish defensive athletes like Jaren Jackson Jr. are the kind of players you need to handle other unicorns. I'm not saying Jaren Jackson Jr. again could stop Kevin Durant, but you're talking about a guy who is 6'9" with a 7-foot wingspan who can move well on the perimeter. That's about what you would draw up in a laboratory if you wanted to not get murdered by Kevin Durant in a basketball game. So, and they still have Steven Adams to be the big man in other situations. So against DeAndre Ayton specifically. And so I like the potential of how they could match up against the Kevin Durant Suns. And again, getting Kennard another shooter gives them an offensive aspect on the wing, a knockdown shooter that they have in Bane and they have in Brooks, but those guys have to be a little bit more than just knockdown shooters. So getting a guy like Kennard in there who's just a role player in that situation, I think that's huge for the Memphis Grizzlies.
Agreed. Yeah, I agree 100%.
Now, they're not really a dark horse because they're the second seed in the West right now, but maybe the Clippers might be the better answer for the dark horse because I like the moves they made. And at any point, if they put together a 40-game stretch leading into the playoffs, where Kawhi's playing the majority of the games and Paul George is healthy, well, then all bets are off, and the Clippers are a giant wild card. It's kind of been like that for a few years now.
Yeah.
And at this point, you can't bet on them being there because of because of Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. You just can't bet on them consistently.
So Matt Rocchio says, lock it in, call your bookie, Boston versus Phoenix in the finals.
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay, I just threw it out. I just thought I'd see what kind of reaction we got.
Now,
No, it's good. I think all these deals sort of change the equation, not only with the teams themselves, but with the chemistry in the conferences. I think it's going to make it a fascinating stretch run.
Absolutely, and Boston didn't really do anything. Like you said, the East stayed pat a little bit more. The big thing for me in the East that I was going to mention was the 76ers traded away Matisse Thybulle, which seemed like a weird move because he's such a defensive monster. But they got Jalen McDaniels from the Bobcats, who's a nice little scoring guard. And so I think it's even interesting to see a team like the 76ers, who they make a move, but the only move they make is this slight little one on the periphery with one of their starting guards to get just a little bit more offense. than what they're putting out right now from that spot. I think that's a really interesting move because consistently we see in the NBA that when the playoffs roll around, defense tightens up, and so having a stopper guard like Matisse Thybulle seems like it'd be something pretty useful to have against the Philadelphia 76ers. But they decided, we need a little bit of offensive juice at times, and that's shocking with Embiid and Maxey and Harden. But nonetheless, it's interesting to me that that's the decision the third team in the East made, was just, let's get a little bit more offense despite being already one of the better offensive teams in the league.
The only logic I can see is in that move is that if the Sixers, believe they can make a run, if they believe that, we don't have to agree or not. But if they believe it, then a tweak makes sense. Whereas in the West, everyone's making big, giant moves. And they're saying, no, we're really close. This tweak, we can now compete with Boston. I don't agree with that, but that's the only way it makes sense to me.
Yeah, and there's some second-year, 23-year-old producer at ESPN right now who just start working on the package for when Jay Crowder wins a title with the Milwaukee Bucks, and we have this sentimental music. He didn't play for 15 months. He thought his time in the NBA was over, but now Jay Crowder is a champion. Because that's exactly how this goes. Is you get a guy who hasn't played in a year, who's a solid 3-and-D player, who finally gets away from the team that wasn't playing him, inexplicably, of course. And now Jay Crowder pops up on the Bucks. They don't have their PJ Tucker anymore. Jay Crowder sounds like he can be a little bit of a PJ Tucker for him, small ball 5, wing 4, knock down some threes, play some good defense, and all of a sudden it's a redemption story like we've never seen before in the NBA Finals. Just start working on the package now. It's practically happening.
Well, it's funny that you're willing to make an outlandish prediction like that, but you won't say who you think will be in this year's finals. But that's okay. I get it.
I will say right now, I'll make a prediction right now. The Bucks are going to be in the finals in the Eastern Conference. But
in the Eastern Conference Finals.
Yes. They're going to win the Eastern Conference Finals and be playing in the finals from the Eastern Conference.
The Celtics.
Yes, they are. But here's the thing, Rammer. I don't know about the West, but I'm so excited because, Rammer, 3 months ago, I'm planning a trip to Phoenix. And my significant other who I'm on the trip with, it says, let's go to an NBA game. You already been to your first one. Let's go to your second one. I'm like, that's great. The Nuggets are in town playing the Phoenix Suns. I'm like, hey, that's all. You're my favorite team. Let's go watch them. That'd be pretty special. So 3 months ago, I got tickets for the Nuggets and the Suns in Phoenix. And then I woke up today. It's March 29th, I think.
So which of the stars are going to take the game off?
Okay, listen. Don't jump to the damn
Durant. No, he's going to get healthy. Joker says, "No, I'm not going to show him my game. I'm going to chill."
Listen, you knew exactly where I was going.
Michael Porter will have a sore back.
Listen, if Michael Porter plays in that game as a Mizzou fan, I'll be shocked.
He played really well the other night. He played really well the other night.
Yeah, like 30. Yeah, like 30 points on like 25 shots. He was crazy. But
I like to see. I hate to see guys that we followed have such long-term, troublesome injury problems. It's just really sad to me. So I root for him.
Oh, yeah, me too, obviously. But yeah, you kind of jumped what I was going to say, which is I'm very excited. I'm extremely lucky the fact that the ticket's gotten this much better. Because literally when I bought that ticket, the Suns hadn't completely fallen out of favor yet, but they weren't exactly doing that hot. But the Nuggets were only like the fourth seed in the West, and Kevin Durant was a Brooklyn Net. And then 3 months later, the Nuggets are the number one team in the West, and Kevin Durant's now a Phoenix Sun. But you're absolutely right. Today I thought to myself, I'm like, there's no way all four. There's no way Booker, Durant, Paul, and Jokic all play. There's no freaking way I'm going to get that lucky that this ticket that turned into a freaking solid gold bar overnight last night somehow while I was sitting on my iPhone is going to be one of them's not playing. You're absolutely right. I just hope it's Chris Paul. That's terrible to say. I've been watching Chris Paul my entire basketball fandom, And I should be very excited to see him. But at the same time, Kevin Durant, one of the greatest scorers ever. Nikola Jokic, one of my favorite players ever. Devin Booker, son of a Mizzou guy. If I gotta take any future Hall of Famer not in that lineup, I'm sorry, CP3, but I'm not a Wake Forest grad. But anyway, I'm excited about it, Rammer. The NBA got a lot more interesting today. Again, there's a lot of trades we weren't able to cover. There's so many all over the place across the West. There was 10% of the league, Rammer, got traded today in the NBA. 10%
That's crazy.
Of the league was involved in a trade today.
And
absolutely unbelievable.
Who in the league still holds all of their second-round picks for the next 5 years? Nobody.
Mainly because I'm pretty sure there's going to be a draft where the Oklahoma City Thunder own half of the second round. It's like it's going to be like the 2027 draft. It's literally going to be the Oklahoma City Thunder are going to have 7 or 8 picks in a row one year.
Everybody just go home.
Yeah, and they should. Again, this isn't a carnival game, Sam Presti. You don't get to like walk into the league office. You're like, I have these 30 second-round picks. Can you give me one lottery selection for them? That's not how it works.
No.
It'd be fun if it did, but that's not how it works. I'm sorry, Sam Presti.
But seriously, they'll have to start moving those because that is that's not the way you need to draft. You get
by the way,
one or two a year and a free agent and maybe a trade. But to have, a bunch of guys come in and only one or two are going to make the roster, that's not a way to do it.
And by the way, I one last trade I need to mention. James Wiseman was traded for 5 second-round picks today. Former number 2 overall pick in the draft for the Golden State Warriors was moved for 5 second-round picks a few years after he was number 2 overall. It's absolutely insane. But we got to talk about what's going to be an insane atmosphere, as it is every time these two teams play each other. Because Rammer, you're in Ohio. It's Arch Barron Cup week. It's Mizzou and it's SLU, I should say, St. Louis facing off against Dayton tomorrow evening. It's going to be an incredible game. It's kind of gotten a little bit softened because the Billikens had that 2-game slide there in the A-10, and then Dayton had 3 out of 4 losses back in January in the A-10. They had a big win, though, against VCU the same night SLU got back in the win column against Rhode Island. Right off the bat, your thoughts on what is always a crazy matchup for the Billikens in Ohio?
Well, it had been a tremendous rivalry for several decades, but quite frankly, when things declined for SLU, after Jim Cruz won the National Coach of the Year, talent dwindled, and Dayton more or less took over the series. Mm-hmm. So for the last, 10 years now?
Yeah.
8 years, whatever it is, Dayton's pretty much dominated the series. Now, they split last year, but winning at Dayton in the last decade has been next to impossible. It will be kind of interesting. The highest scoring team in the league, SLU, against the best defensive team in the league, Dayton. Dayton's got 2 bigs, the top 2 rebounders in the league. 1, 2 on the list, both Dayton Flyers. And I think that'll be the challenge because we know that the Billikens, it's an almost must for SLU to win the rebounding battle. It's hard to imagine they'll be able to do that. So how do you counteract the number that has been 99% critical in victory? That's the real challenge, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Dayton this year ranking 75th in rebounds. And when you just take a look at their starting lineup, it's hard to see. It's not hard to see why. Rammer, Kobe Elvis is 6'2". And then their most common starting lineup over the last few games, after 6'2" Kobe Elvis, is followed up by 6'8" Mike Shatterjamps, 6'8" Tumani Kamara, 6'10" Mustafa Amzil, and 6'10" Deron Holmes II. They are running some big-ass lineups out onto the court right now. St. Louis, obviously, not anywhere close to the longest team in the A-10 or college basketball. Just right off the bat, skill, positionless basketball. We get kind of lost sometimes in how sometimes the game of basketball gets really simplified when an entire team is just longer and taller than the team they're playing. How difficult, just right off the bat, is that going to make this matchup for the Billikens?
Well, I think you talk about, the actions they run to get guys free. You got to make shots. I'm going to set the over under at what they need jump shot wise, 3-point wise to win. I'm going to set it at 11.5.
Okay.
Makes. I think if you told me, hey, I promise you can hit 12 threes against Dayton, I think you've got a really good chance.
Well, to your point, Rammer, just kind of looking here at the Billikens, they are 5-0 when they've hit double-digit three-pointers this season.
And I think it's got to be, you got to push it a little bit because of the aforementioned Dayton defensive prowess. So if you even went, 12 for 30, I'd take that.
Yeah, that would be a fascinating line for the Billikens. We haven't seen them go to that length, but again, when you're playing a team that with a profile that you haven't seen the rest of this year, and maybe a profile that you aren't a good matchup against in a lot of ways, you got to do something a little bit different. Again, that's going to be the trickiest part for me. It's going to be interesting to see where the matchups come from. God, would this entire conversation be different as it would be in a lot of games if you had a guy like Fred Thatch, who, I don't care if he's 6'4" and Kamara's 6'8" or Durant Holmes is 6'10". I'm taking Fred Thatch, giving a good effort against those guys no matter what. But you eliminate that, and now the question becomes Javon Pickett, Javonte Perkins, Gibson Jimerson. These guys are not necessarily undersized or small relative to even their position. I mean, Pickett plays, a small power forward, but he's a thick guy. And so these guys, as they have in a lot of games, again, they're going to have to step up defensively and be problematic. They're going to have to be obstacles in these guys' ways. You just can't be playing matador defense. I'm not saying you can shut these guys down. You're not going to. You can't dominate these guys, but you have to get in their way and make them actually work for it.
Two things. One, personnel strategy. You say, look, we can't match them in size. So let's go the opposite way. Let's make them match up with us, mouse in the house, and play the smallest lineup you can play. That's one thing. Two, and I don't have any idea about this. I was traveling today, not at practice. Will you try more? Will you play more zone than you normally do? In fact, will you play mostly zone? Court, you say, okay, you can pack it in. But sometimes it's really hard to find your blockout assignment in a zone. So I don't know the answers to those, but those are a couple of things you could consider as you try to put your game plan together.
Yeah, and one thing that's going to be fascinating, obviously, every time we talk about St. Louis, I can't help but wonder how teams have these crazy shooting nights against them. Lately, especially in conference play, Dayton has really jacked up the amount of threes they're taking. I wonder if maybe that could be one thing that could play in the Billikens' favor, because it's a game where Dayton isn't pounding the paint consistently in that advantage. Maybe the fact that Dayton's shooting a little bit more, and they took almost 30 threes the last 3 of the last 5 games in conference play. They've won them. They've hit those. They've hit threes in some of those games. But I really think this could be a situation where their profile that they're coming to the table with might not be as bad as it could have been, had it been earlier in the season when they were pounding the paint game after game, possession after possession with Kamara and Durant Holmes.
I don't really have an answer for you. I don't know, if they're making threes and dominating inside. Well, it doesn't matter what jersey you're wearing, what league you're playing in. If you're dominating at the rim and hitting threes, you're going to win games. That's it. I mean, there's no answer for that.
Yeah, and that's, they have this. It's just such a weird team. If you go back and look at some of these games they played, because even when the games where they've been completely out of sorts and their offense hasn't been able to get going, and they've had games where they've gone 14 of 30 the night before, and the very next game they shoot 3 of 10 from deep. It's kind of like St. Louis, where it's not even that they're getting outplayed. it's just kind of a listless thing where they're letting the other team dictate the pace of the game. And that's been St. Louis's big problem. And I think they did a little bit better. Travis talked about them doing a little bit better against Rhode Island, but that's still a big problem. So you have two teams, but when they lose games because they let the other team dictate the style. So it's going to be interesting to see maybe in the first 5-10 minutes which team finally is feeling it that night and puts the onus on themselves to dictate what the style of the game is going to be.
Well, we got to be real about this. Trying to beat Dayton at their place it's really a challenge. The Billikens will have to make shots early. They have to. And even then, you wouldn't say you're dictating the style, but maybe if you can do that, you can prevent Dayton from dictating the style. And then it's just who makes shots, who makes plays, who gets rebounds. If they shoot 33s, do the long rebounds off threes, does that kind of negate a height advantage that Dayton would have? Who knows? I don't know. I think those kinds of things are impossible to predict, but those are all legitimate scenarios.
You said who makes plays. That's the big thing I'm going to still be watching for the Billikens. I thought you saw it again in Rhode Island. Gibson Jimerson, Javon Pickett, Sincere Parker, Javante Perkins, these guys, the big men, these guys making just classic, sensible basketball passes inside the offense. Not stuff, not passes that are 100% within a play set. A guy's coming to curl around the screen, so you hit him there because he's ready. But just the basic passes that you have to make against a shifting defense to be an above-average offense. And that's such a problem for the Billikens at times this season against better defenses, against longer defenses, ones where the ball being faster than the man matters a little bit less, or almost because you have to pass to beat them matters almost entirely more. Can they make those passes against the Dayton defense when they're this long? That making that pass at the first split second when the defense shifts and they leave that guy across the play wide open on the perimeter for an open three, making that pass right when they shift instead of one fake stop and then making the pass and then they're recovering already. That's the difference against this kind of length, this kind of defensive team. If SLU continues to show improvements there from players not named Yuri Collins, then I think maybe we could see the offense get going. If they stagnate a little bit again in that one sense of the game, I think it maybe looks a lot more like, Iona or one of those games where the offense just can't get rolling.
Well, I think the Iona and a couple of other games, I think that's
Iona Maryland might be
that's
too
a completely different animal. But I think
say Bonaventure? Say Bonaventure maybe? Maybe I'm trying to think of a game that's a good comparison.
Well, I appreciate your glass half full take on that. I'll go glass half empty here because while the Bills did some of that against a bad Rhode Island team, Rhode Island dictated the pace of the game. Rhode Island did everything they should have done on the road to win a game. And there were still stagnancy moments in the Billiken offense against Rhode Island. I think that's the key, not getting stagnant. I think when they move the ball, they can move it against anybody. But how do you avoid the stagnancy? That's, I think, the question.
Absolutely. That's going to be the big question for me. It's going to be the big question for Rammer. We're going to be watching all of that as the Billikens face off against Dayton in Ohio. It's always a big game, the Arch Barron Cup between the Billikens and the Flyers. Is going to be tomorrow night. You'll be able to hear Rammer with Earl Austin Jr. on the call on the mighty KMOX. Rammer, before we get going and closing out an incredible episode here on Two Man Game, please tell everybody about your friends at Royal Banks of Missouri.
Don't forget, Royal Banks has been doing it for 60 years in St. Louis proper, St. Charles, East Side, Northeast Missouri, everywhere you go. Royal Banks is your hometown bank. Royal Banks, for better service, means better banking. Member FDIC and equal housing lender.
Rammer, you have a great call and have a very safe trip back to St. Louis after the game on Friday.
Sounds good. Talk to you soon, buddy.
Talk to you soon, Rammer, and thank you so much, St. Louis. We will talk to you soon with more basketball here on Two Man Game on Claims Online.
St. Louis Acura has an unbeatable selection of new and pre-owned vehicles. We have over 200 vehicles on hand and in transit. Get the new 2023 MDX or Integra with up to $1,000 in loyalty. Rebates and financing as low as 3.9% for 60 months. You can also lease the 2023 MDX for as low as $599 a month. Or get a pre-owned certified MDX with 3.99% financing. St. Louis Acura, better than ever for you.